I just saw Wicked for Good, and I have so many thoughts. First, and most importantly, I am in fact psychic. I don't know anything about the musical, and I predicted about 85% correctly.
It's like I have ESPN or something.
And yet, I am still quite confused about this story, and I have mixed opinions overall about the movie. So I really want to discuss it with you. The first part of this video is going to be my overall review, and then I'm going to go into the plot a little bit more in depth, go through my predictions, specifically what I got wrong, and also what I got right that upon watching it didn't really land for me. We have so much to cover, so let's just get into it. Let's start with the visuals. I really loved how there were so many visual parallels between part 1 and part 2. It just made for a really nice through line and it felt very intentional. I thought that the animals visually looked pretty good, but my favorite visual effect is probably the way that Elphaba flies throughout the sky. I thought it was very epic how her cape whipped around, and sometimes flying can look a little bit goofy or a little bit cheesy, but I don't know, they did it really well here. One of my favorite visual shots was the last shot in the movie. It was such a cute ode to the musical playbill. The biggest problem I had with the visuals, which I had in part 1 as well, is that everything still looks a little too muted for me, a little bit too flat. The original Wizard of Oz is so vibrant and so colorful, and I really think this needed more saturation. I know it's supposed to be more grounded in reality, a little bit more mature, but there's just something that doesn't feel right about that for Oz. It's too bad because the costumes are really beautiful, the sets are really intricate, and there's a lot of depth to them, but the color and the lighting take a lot of that out, which I think is a shame. And on that note, let's talk about the costumes. I really loved Elphaba's whole leather, organic, woodsy vibe. It definitely feels a lot more magical than it did in part 1, where it still felt very civilian. I'm also absolutely obsessed with that blanket cardigan she wears when she gets with Fiero. With Glinda's costumes, though, I have a little bit of a nitpick with her. She looks beautiful. All of the costumes are really gorgeous. The biggest problem I have is this gosh darn blue dress. Now, mainly because this screwed me up so much in my predictions because I was trying to figure out the timeline of all of these things happening. And I'm like, why is she wearing this dress in so many scenes? Does all of this happen in a day? Turns out she just only has one dress, apparently, whenever she's in the bubble. It's a beautiful dress, but you're telling me she has one bubble dress? This materialistic girl? Absolutely not. She needed way more dresses. So I was a little bit disappointed. She gets way more costume changes in the first movie, and I just thought it was weird. I also noticed that Glinda had these very intense false lashes on. And she did have them on in the first movie as well, but I just found them to be very distracting in this one. I also really loved the craftsmanship on Nessa's chair. I also thought the Tin Man looked great. I really liked the way that they did him. Now, the Scarecrow is a different story. I couldn't tell if the Scarecrow was CGI'd or if it was like actual makeup. It looked so odd. It was very frightening. I actually think the original Scarecrow looked better. I really didn't have the best time looking at that. Let's talk about the acting. Cynthia, for me, is just a star. I think she is the strongest out of the cast, to be honest. I just find her so mesmerizing. To me, Cynthia is someone who really becomes a different character. Like, she is Elphaba. This is Elphaba. This is not Cynthia. She can do no wrong. She did absolutely amazing, and I wanted more of her, to be completely honest. Then there's Ariana. I love Ariana. I'm a huge Ariana Grande fan. I really loved her in the first Wicked. I think she also did a good job, but she doesn't disappear into the role as well as Cynthia, I think. Though it might be because the Glinda in part 2 is very different than the Glinda in part 1, and she's a lot more funnier and whimsical in part 1. And I think Ariana really excels in comedic roles and maybe less so in dramatic roles, but I still think she did a very good job. I'm not mad about her performance at all. She is very heartbreaking when she cries, I will say that. I have seen people say Madame Morrible was not the best casting choice, and I do have to agree. And I did say this in my first Wicked review that I just didn't feel she was menacing enough or had maybe the right presence for the role. She's also not the strongest singer, and I think when you're casting for a musical, especially something as iconic as Wicked, I think a strong voice is really important. And I think Michelle even said to John Chu, who directed Wicked, she's like, I can't sing, but he cast her anyway. Then there's the music. My favorite songs were definitely No Good Deed and For Good. And Am I Crazy? But there was definitely some romantic tension going on between these two little lovely ladies. I feel like this scene was supposed to be so emotional. Unfortunately, everyone in my theater was like talking during this scene, this beautiful, like heart-wrenching scene. And so I did not really feel much during it because I was trying to focus on what they were saying. But that lingering shot in the closet, I thought was really beautiful. No Good Deed also was one of my favorite parts of the movie. I will say I do like the music, I think in part one better. And one of the things I missed about the music in part one is that they have a lot more choreographed sequences. This is a much darker movie, so it doesn't really make as much sense to have these like dancing songs. But I did really miss that. I think the visuals were just slightly less interesting. In particular, one of the opening numbers, Glinda has a part where she's singing about how she's actually not that happy, even though she has everything. But I almost felt like those thoughts should have been her sort of internal monologue and said as she was going up to the microphone. It was really weird having her say, there's bridges you never didn't know you crossed until you crossed them. And she was saying that to the audience. I felt like she should have been saying this to herself as fear left or whatever. And then as soon as the music builds up again and she goes like, thank goodness, that's when I think she should have reached the microphone and talked to the audience again. Because it was just, I don't know, maybe that's how it goes in the musical. Maybe that's just me. But I felt like what she was saying didn't necessarily match what was happening on screen. There were also 2 new songs, No Place Like Home and The Girl in the Bubble. I thought they were just okay. They kind of sounded a little generic. The Girl in the Bubble specifically wasn't my favorite. And it was kind of odd because the way Ariana sang it was very Ariana Grande. Whereas with a lot of her other songs, she has a very Glinda accent. And this was one of the only songs that didn't have that. And it sort of took me out of the music a little bit. Okay, so let's talk about the story. Overall, I really liked that there was a lot more action in this one than in part one. Even though I really love part one, I did think it dragged on in certain areas. But this one, there was just lots of stuff happening, which was really exciting. And I really liked that it was a little bit more mature and a nice transition from the happy, innocent days of university. But because I was seeing all of this information for the first time, I had no backstory. I felt like it was so rushed, and there were so many parts of the story that I wanted to see more of. Although part of this might be due to the fact that I made that predictions video, and so I perhaps built myself up for all of these questions that I thought were going to be answered. And then when they weren't, I was like a little bit disappointed. I do still think I would have felt it was rushed anyway. So let's go through the plots and my predictions, specifically the ones that I didn't get right. I would recommend going to watch that video first because this part will make a little bit more sense. I'm not going to explain everything that I thought was going to happen, but it should make sense, I think, if you haven't seen it anyway. But I would just go watch it because it's a fun video. So the first part of my predictions was all about where the characters were going to be, what the conflict was going to be, and I got pretty much all this right, but you can kind of get that from the trailer. However, where did this dress go? I guess this whole scene was cut, which is a bit disappointing because Glinda gets so few dresses, and I think she needed this one. I quite like this vibe of her reveling in the opposite type of propaganda that Elphaba is currently getting. I also expected Glinda to feel a lot guiltier than she did. I mean, I know she does feel guilty. She has that whole part, and thank goodness. But that was really the only part, at least in the beginning of the movie, where you see her kind of struggle with everything that she now has at the expense of her best friend. And she also acted very different than in part one. I thought that her relationship with Elphaba had changed her a little bit. And she makes a really big step of dancing with Elphaba, who is the, quote, weirdo of the school, and she doesn't care about her image in that moment. And even though she doesn't go with Elphaba in Defying Gravity, because she still has such a big journey of growth ahead of her, I still felt like she was still likable. But yes, she is a very self-serving character still. Whereas in part two, I was like, I think she just became a lot worse. She really just seemed, for lack of a better word, a bit wicked. And it was just a little bit jarring for me. I was half right, half wrong about this scene. I thought that Elphaba would be here because she was actively looking for Dr. Dillamond, who was caged in the first movie and just like ripped out of his teaching position. But Elphaba does not try to find him. She happens upon him. And this struck me as odd because Elphaba and Dr. Dillamond were very close in part one, and he was one of her only friends. Actually, you know when she says, "You were the only friend I ever had"? That's so not true. She was friends with the goat. Oh, and that's another thing about this movie is that there were some lines in the trailers that weren't in the film. I was really sad when that line about, "Look at me with their eyes and not yours." That was so heartbreaking, and that wasn't in the movie, I don't think. I also predicted that Dr. Dillamond would die because he wasn't in any of the trailers. He doesn't die, but he may as well have because he did not get one single line. He really was silenced. I thought he should have said at least something at the very end when all the animals unite together. And I think this plot with the animals was a little bit underdeveloped. I really expected Elphaba to be really starting a rebellion, but there was really only one scene about it. The animals straight up just don't want to join her. Like, poor Elphaba does so much for everyone, and just no one appreciates her. I was also pretty close at what this scene was as well. It was very odd watching it play out because Elphaba, like, why is she entertaining them? The wizard and Glinda have not earned this with her. Horrible, horrible deeds that they've been doing for the past year or whatever. It just felt very out of character for Elphaba. I also thought that they were cooking up some sort of plan here, which I guess they kind of were. And then I was like, yeah, it's gonna all come crashing down after this, which it does. But I thought Fiero was gonna be in on this plan, and he's actually the person that makes it all come crashing down. Their little love story was very cute, but I was not really a fan of how the song just started playing. I was like, you guys haven't seen each other for gosh knows how many years. And I feel like we should have a conversation before we just start, getting to it. Oh yeah, and then the other thing I thought about during this scene was I really liked that Elphaba was very shy about the whole thing. That seemed very in character. But Mr. Fiero was quite ravenous. And by that, I mean just very hormonal. He just was looking at her with such intensity. And that's why I wanted them to talk a bit first, because we just ran away from Glinda, the poor woman, got stood up on her wedding day. How do we feel about this? He finally found her isolated home in the woods that she's been living in. Like, does he feel bad for her? What does she feel? I don't know. I just like why we just immediately go into song and he's just looking at her with such burning passion. But then as the song went on, I was like, okay, no, that's cute. The next part of my predictions video was all about the backstories of everybody that we see in The Wizard of Oz and how does everybody become who they become. Like, who is the Scarecrow, the Tin Man, blah, blah, blah. I was not expecting Nessa to be wicked. What the heck? Maybe I need to watch part one again because I was on Nessa's side. I had so much sympathy for sweet little darling Nessa. Like, I really did not blame Nessa for feeling like she was always in her sister's shadow because she kind of was. And I also felt like genuine love and care between Elphaba and Nessa. Also in the first movie, Nessa was always in white, which is typically like this innocent color. So yeah, I just was not expecting her to actually be so evil. And she was evil, all right? She was horrible. And this is one of the things that I really wanted to explore more. This was so random to me because, I mean, I just didn't expect it. So to see her go from part one Nessa to part two Nessa was like, I was so confused. Like, how do we get here? She says that Elphaba didn't visit her after their father died. And so she felt very alone, which I can understand that. But like, is that enough for us to go full on witch? I mean, I'm not sure. And did Nessa not ever feel bad for Elphaba for all of this awful propaganda she was receiving? I also expected to see more of their sisterly relationship because we know that Nessa is going to die in, The Wizard of Oz. So I thought they were going to be building up this like really tragic story between her and her sister. But, she kind of dies and you're like, well, maybe that was for the best because she wasn't a good person. What do we think about Nessa? Another huge part of that predictions video revolved around these slippers. I was so convinced that there was something else to do with these slippers. I was like, I think they have sentimental value, but They also seem powerful. It turns out that I was just right. They just have sentimental value. They do have power. They make Nessa fly. But I was a little bit disappointed that there wasn't more to the shoes because they're such an iconic piece of The Wizard of Oz. Then there was the Lion, Tin Man, and Scarecrow. The Tin Man, I did predict who it was, but I did not get how it happened. Bok was turned into a Tin Man, first unintentionally by Nessa, I guess, removing his heart, and then Elphaba saving him by turning him into a Tin Man. I was kind of right though, because I did say in that video that maybe she was reading a spell from the Grimoire and she was trying to help him. So absolutely not what I was thinking of, but okay, I'll give myself a half point because I was half correct. I do have a little bit of a problem with this though, because how does Nessa know how to read the Grimoire? How does she know that? I don't know. Because in part 1, Madame Morrible tells Elphaba, I can only read a few words. Don't worry if you can't read anything. And Elphaba just reads the whole thing. And Madame Morrible is a sorceress. Nessa has no power. So I was like, how is she reading from this Grimoire? Granted, she does read it incorrectly, but still, little bit of a lore inconsistency. Can we just also talk about for a second how awful Bok is? He doesn't learn anything. He's completely obsessive with Glinda. Then he's completely obsessive with revenge. This is another thing I'm so confused by because I don't understand what his end is. I'm going to get into this later, but we don't ever see him go to the wizard and get a heart. So I'm like, is he just proud of himself that he killed the witch? I mean, he doesn't deserve that. He's really not a great guy. I mean, he does suffer a great tragedy, absolutely. And Nessa also did discriminate him. So he does suffer trauma for sure. But I don't like the fact that his ending is left open-ended. I just like, what does he think now? I also thought the scenes with Bok and Nessa were really interesting. I would have loved to have explored their dynamic a little bit more. I realize they have so much to cover and there are so many characters, but yeah, I want to have more sympathy for Bok, but I don't really because we don't really have the time to kind of build it up. And then the Cowardly Lion as well. I would have loved to have a little bit more with him to know why specifically he was so cowardly. I mean, I know technically he's not a coward, he just thinks he is, but it was just like, he was just so ungrateful for Elphaba's help. And I thought that we would at least see like a quick flashback scene of some sort of trauma that he went through that made him so fearful, but I can't even remember what maybe he does say something. It was like one line that he had. I thought it was more about like, don't go with Elphaba because she's evil. I mean, she's not, I don't understand why he thinks she's so evil. He never would have been able to talk if she didn't let him out. And then there's the Scarecrow. I did guess how this was going to happen correctly, crazily enough. But in my mind, it was a lot darker, which it is dark, but I was picturing something a lot more traumatic. Because in that predictions video, I was like, this is going to be so sad. Oh my gosh, she's going to turn her lover into this inhuman piece of straw. It's going to be heartbreaking. And the way that they filmed it was it was like in this black and white cutscene montage. And then they also hid his face until the very end. So I guess this was supposed to be some secret reveal. I would love to know if you watched Wicked Part 2 and you didn't know anything going in. When Fiyero was being crucified, did you think he was turning into the Scarecrow, or were you really shocked when you saw that he was a Scarecrow in the end? Because to me, it was kind of obvious, but maybe that's because I did that predictions video. And I feel like it would have been so much more heartbreaking to see him turn into the Scarecrow. And then you leave him thinking that he's going to turn bitter towards her, and then he's actually not bitter. The Winged Monkeys also was another backstory that confused me a little bit. They join Elphaba because she frees them, which I think makes a lot of sense. But there's also a part in the movie where Chistery, like the main flying monkey, overhears her say that she didn't mean to give them wings and that she was tricked into doing it. But Chistery was there when this happened. Shouldn't he have already known that? I must be missing something. Also, the way that I got that this was Fiyero's castle was so funny to me. Because in that video, I was like, I think this is Fiyero's castle, but I just feel like he doesn't live here. Like, this doesn't give Fiyero vibes. And then in the movie, he's like, oh yeah, I live in the other castle. So at least that explained one of the questions that I had. I do still think, though, that this castle and the backstory of how Elphaba becomes the Wicked Witch of the West is a little bit underdeveloped, though. Because does Elphaba really need to leave her home in the trees? I felt like she was pretty safe here. And no one had found her, right? I mean, it does make sense for the mechanics of the trapdoor and the melting and such. I thought there was going to be like this big backstory with how she became to be a ruler of a castle. This tornado was also very sad. It ends up being a ploy to lure Elphaba to Munchkin Lands because her sister Nessa will be threatened. And it's extra tragic because it's Glinda's idea that makes Madame Morrible do this. But again, I thought there was going to be a specific reason why Dorothy specifically comes to Oz. I thought like she was going to be a mistake from the Grimmery or something, but there's no backstory. She just comes here because it's the Wizard of Oz. Maybe we don't need a reason. I mean, I guess this story in this movie is really about Glinda and Elphaba. And do we really need to explain all this other stuff if it's about these two? This is such a funny image. Maybe not, but I guess that's just what I was expecting. The next part of my predictions was all about what would happen when Dorothy gets there. Turns out, not much. All of Dorothy's scenes are done off screen. I actually really like that we never see Dorothy's face because she really isn't important to this story. However, I did think we were going to see the scenes that had Elphaba and Glinda in them from the original Wizard of Oz, especially the ruby slippers scene. And I thought that Wicked was going to give us new context for what happens and that Elphaba wasn't really being wicked. It was just all a big misunderstanding and that we would see it unfold in a different way than the original movie. But it's just straight up not in it. And so that did disappoint me a little bit. And for this slippers scene, I feel like I really needed some more context because how cold of Glinda to give away the shoes of her dead sister. Yes, she is mad about Fiyero choosing Elphaba. I mean, she must have known, though, that Fiyero never truly loved her if she had to trick him into marrying her. But I don't know, that seemed so heartless. Like, she knows that this is all Elphaba has left of her family. She knows the trauma that she's been through with her family. That said, though, I did find it a little bit odd that Elphaba wanted these shoes so badly because there wasn't much time building up the relationship between Nessa and Elphaba. I mean, if anything, she almost barely grieved her sister at this house. And so because that wasn't really there, I was like, are these shoes really even that important? Was all of this really worth the trouble? Because these shoes only have a sentimental value to them, I felt like as an audience member, I should have felt that as well. I also was expecting there to be a backstory with the potion. And I thought it was the potion that made Elphaba magical, but it turns out that she's just magical because she's a mixed baby between the two worlds. And I'm so lost at why that makes her so powerful, because humans have no power. I also don't think that Elphaba ever learns that this is her real father. And I feel like that doesn't make much sense because I think there's a point where he is drinking from his potion bottle and Elphaba is, I'm pretty sure, right there. And I feel like she would have recognized it. Elphaba is a very perceptive girl, but she never does. So I thought there was going to be like a slight bit of redemption for the wizard because he'd be like, oh my God, she's my daughter and she's trying to do good. And what am I doing? And that would, make him say all those kind words to the Tin Man and the Scarecrow and the Lion because of his love for Elphaba or something like that. But she just gets no resolution at all with her family. It's so sad because her real dad was her enemy. Her other dad hated her. Her sister hated her. And she thinks she killed her mom. Like she has some family issues for sure. But I feel like she maybe needed one line to sort of resolve all of this family trauma. Like, I have to let go of those I love, even if they don't love me, because this isn't serving me anymore or something. That's bad. That's a bad line. But, something along that meaning. But at least Glinda gets the wizard to leave Oz. Okay, so the last part is the end of the movie. I'm really disappointed that we didn't see Glinda rip off these puffy sleeve things when she goes horseback riding, because she doesn't have them anymore when she goes to see Elphaba. And I would have really liked to have seen that active choice to change her image, because that was her whole thing, and her whole problem was that she needed this perfect image. I did expect Glinda to have a redemption, but watching it play out, I'm honestly not sure if she deserves it. Glinda was really terrible to Elphaba. She's semi-responsible for killing Nessa. She forced Fiyero into a marriage he definitely didn't want. She stayed by Madame Morrible's side for years, or I don't know how long it was, but it was a long time. She presumably knew about the caging of the animals. It's a lot of really bad stuff, and I'm just not sure if this one act of her secretly warning Elphaba is enough for Elphaba to forgive her. And with that, do you think Glinda should get the Grimoire? I think they should burn this Grimoire because it's done nothing but cause trouble. And Glinda ends up getting powers in the end, and I don't know if she earns them. In my prediction video, I was expecting Glinda to realize that she has a lot of power, not with magic, but with the people. And that is almost a greater power than magic because we can see how powerful the people can be in this movie, specifically for evil because they're against Elphaba, but Glinda can use that for good. And I thought she'd have to cope with not being powerful. She never even comes clean to Oz about being powerless, and now she never has to. I felt like she should have had to make some decisions that would have risked her perfect image. That didn't make her look good, but these actions would have been for the good of Oz. And then you'd really be selling that she's now acting out of selflessness and not selfishness. Glinda also takes all of the credit of the good work that Elphaba does. And I understand that's the reason Elphaba, quote, dies. She's sacrificing herself for the good of Oz so that they can move on from her and they can work towards goodness. But it's just so sad that Glinda gets her heart's desire. And poor Elphaba, yes, she frees the animals and they get a home in Oz, which is what she wanted, but she doesn't get to witness it and she doesn't get a home in Oz. In the end, I feel like Glinda gets almost everything, and I know that she doesn't get Elphaba and she's going to be living alone, but I think that getting powers in the end kind of defeats the purpose of her character. It just gets handed to her like everything else. I also thought that it was going to be Glinda that knew Elphaba was still alive instead of Fiyero, and I'm still not sure why Glinda can't know that Elphaba is alive. So instead of Glinda, Elphaba gets Fiyero. Thank goodness she gets something because on my predictions video, I was like, her ending sounds so sad. She better get something. And thank goodness she did. Unfortunately, he's a scarecrow. She just gets such a poor end of the deal. But the fact that Fiyero saves her and knows that she's alive was a little bit confusing because when did they concoct this plan? How did he know that she was gonna be in the dungeons? And Fiyero had to go to Emerald City with Dorothy, right? And then travel all the way back to his castle? How long was she under there for? And on that note, I was a little bit confused why Fiyero would even go with Dorothy in the first place. In my original theory, I thought that Fiyero, because he was brainless, would forget about Elphaba. That would have been a really tragic ending. And that's what would make Elphaba just go wicked. Wicked. I guess they concocted a plan, but I think they should have shown that beforehand because it was really confusing. But her story is really sad. It is so tragic. It's so sad because she gets literally nothing else. Nothing. Well, she gets to start new, I guess, but she is forced out of her home. There's no place like home, and she literally has no home. And I guess maybe home is where Fiyero is, but her story is so sad. I wasn't expecting a happy ending, but it's just very tragic. I just feel for Elphaba. I think that's why I'm so passionate about it. Lastly, Madame Morrible's defeat was, I felt, also a little bit anticlimactic. I just felt her character was so underdeveloped, especially for someone who's supposed to be the face of propaganda. It was also a little bit random that she was now ahead of the press, even though in the first movie she was a university teacher. And then the last thing I predicted that I got completely wrong was I thought there was going to be something to do with time. Because in the original Wizard of Oz, there is an hourglass. And all throughout the first part, there were clocks everywhere. There was things that looked like a clock. There was just a lot of clock references. And there was nothing to do with time. But my goodness, was there not a lot of references to a clock tick? Okay, so now that I have done all of that and given you my thoughts, now we can go and look at some of the comments you guys left on that first video. Oh yeah, I was so confused why the ruby red slippers weren't silver. Okay, so someone said, Fun fact, in the original book, the slippers are actually silver. So that's probably why they're silver and Wicked as well. Oh, okay. Oh, this person predicted Fiero was secretly working with Elphaba correctly. Good for you. So, okay, does this happen differently in the musical? Because a lot of you guys are like, Fiero's a double agent helping Elphaba escape. I think they needed to show that. That was so confusing. I was like, how on earth does this man know she's underneath there? That was so random. I'd love to see a PG-13 take on Wicked. Yeah, I agree with you. I think this movie should have been PG-13. There were a lot of kids in the audience though, so maybe that wouldn't, that would have lost a lot of money, but I think that would have served the story a lot better because this is such a darker interpretation. I definitely think the shoes have magic because of the whole 3 clicks and you go home thing. Yeah, we just don't see that. This person said, I've seen a shot from the trailer where Dorothy has her dog on a leash. I think they may have done this instead of having her dog off a leash to make Elphaba think Dorothy is taking control of the animal and being cruel towards the animal. Oh, yeah. Oh, that's a good point. Too bad none of that's ever explored. I'm pretty sure all the clocks and gears is a reference to this stage show. Oh, okay. In the play, the literal stage is supposed to be the time dragon clock. Oh, yeah, because that's what they say at the beginning of part 1. That makes sense, I guess. A lot of people are really surprised that I guessed Fiero's crucifixion. Is that a really shocking thing to guess? Because the way I was thinking about it was, how would Fiero get on this pole? So I was like, well, what if Fiero was already on the pole before he turned into a scarecrow? And like, why would he be on a pole? Well, that's crucifixion or like torture. And why would someone be torturing him? Oh, well, he just like slept with the enemy. So like maybe they found out. So yeah, that's kind of how I came to that conclusion. So yeah, I would say part 1 for me was like an 8.5, 9, and part 2 was like a 7, 7.5. So it's still okay, just not a wow movie for me. At least I have proof that I am psychic. What did you think of Wicked 2? I'm super curious to read your comments. Make sure you don't ever read a spell from the Grimoire, I guess. Have a good night, guys. Thank you so much for watching.
And by the end, after that song, I think that was one of my favorite moments, was the song where she's, I'm wicked now.
Yes.
I was on her, I was fully on her side. I'm like, everybody else in that Munchkin land's wicked.
Yeah.
Glinda's wicked. Your sister's wicked. The man and Michelle are wicked. Like, absolutely.
Yeah,
Let's go get them.
Absolutely.
And screw this Dorothy who just,
And I was expecting a big battle with the animals.
Yeah, like a rebellion type thing.
And they fled.
Yeah, they just left.
Yeah, and she took this huge sacrifice for Glinda to get all the credit and everything. And after all that, all Elphaba got was a scarecrow. And even then she was accepting of him.
She's such a good person.
She is a great person.
Aww.